As it's 5 past now, so look, welcome ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining the Canon Business Services technology briefing today. My name's Steve Hemsworth and I'll be the moderator for the session today. This is the second in our series following last month's modern workplace briefing. Today's briefing really is addressing the challenges in maintaining a multi-cloud strategy. Nathan, go to the next slide please. So what are the challenges? We see really there are three areas that are the most important of these, which are connectivity, security and management. And our speakers today will be going through those. But before we go on to who's actually going to be presenting today, maybe if we just talk a little bit about Canon Business Services Australia. So you probably would have heard of Harbour IT, and mostly would be familiar with the name of Harbour IT if you're joining today's technology session. Canon Business Services actually is an amalgamation of Harbour IT and Converger, and the focus of the two organisations is really about giving our customers optimised outcomes, whether it's optimised in technology, whether it's optimised in people, or whether it's optimised in processes. A couple of examples of where we are actually leading the market is, Canon Business Services were the first company in Australia to lead robotics process automation as a service. We all know that it's one of the hottest topics out there at the moment. And how do you optimize your people and your processes? You use RPA. So rather than go out and build your own centre of excellence, we actually led Australia by delivering it as a service. Another example is Harbour IT, for instance. Way back when I've known Harbour IT in a previous job, Harbour IT were the first to utilise all flash in the cloud. And that's a standard, but what all flash did at the time to applications, to outcomes, to test and development was actually, leading and cutting edge. So, the two organisations together are very much at the forefront of technology and process optimization. And that's a great place to be, very exciting, and we're growing rapidly, which is always in a good company to be in today's day and age. So welcome to the session, and I'd like to introduce our speakers now. Firstly, we've got Nathan Manning. He's been with Harbour IT for more than 6 years. I've known Nathan for a long time. He's been in the industry for well over 20 years, and I think over half of that, he's really been responsible for solutions architecture and cloud consultancy within the architecture team. So welcome to Nathan. He will be our lead speaker today. And following on, we've also, I'm really glad to introduce Ricky Gervaisis. Ricky actually walks and talks the talk. So Ricky leads all of our cloud practice and service offerings, including our own private cloud. We focus on hybrid and multi-cloud outcomes. So if there's anybody you want to talk to, Ricky does it, because Ricky leads it and manages it on a day-to-day perspective and lives and breathes it, and also is across all what the latest vendor technology outcomes are. So really great to have Ricky on board as well. Not on the picture here today, but I'd also like to introduce Adrian Capolino. Adrian, little hand up there. So Adrian will be on the expert Q&A panel at the end, and Adrian leads a solutions architecture team for the whole of Australia and New Zealand for Canon Business Services. So Adrian is going to be great, and so we're going to have a Q&A session at the end. Just as a little bit of housekeeping, everyone will be muted today for the session. There will be an unmuted Q&A session at the end, but however, we do want people to be interactive in this session. So we'll be monitoring the chat window. If there's any questions during the session, please just pop it in there, and I'll moderate on those questions too. So yeah, feel free as it goes through. If anything pops up, just pop it into the chat window, and we'll address it as we go through. So on with that, I think Nathan, it's over to you. And thanks again, everybody, for joining the session, and we hope you have an interactive, interesting day today.
Thanks, Steve. So first, we're going to look at what that multi-cloud landscape really is at the moment. When you think about the reality of cloud, you're probably already in a multi-cloud environment. You think about Salesforce, Office 365, which has got Teams that we're using today, Exchange Online. We've got AWS for public cloud. We've got Microsoft Azure for public cloud, Google Cloud Platform, we've got private cloud. And the reality is most organizations these days have data in these multiple cloud locations. So multi-cloud, or the concept of multi-cloud, is a reality for most organizations. We're there already. And really, that adoption to going to a multi-cloud world has come up with challenges. We've got challenges around data security. We've got challenges around ensuring that across those multiple clouds where all our data is stored, we've got continuity of business. We've got risk mitigation, we've got compliance and governance issues because our data is stored in those multiple locations. We've got management issues, whether it's managing those various environments, whether it's managing the costs around those environments, and then connectivity and multi-cloud security, ensuring that security is consistent across those platforms. And when we start to talk about multi-cloud as well, not all clouds are equal. Some workloads, it might make sense to put into a public cloud platform, perhaps AWS or perhaps Microsoft Azure. Some might pay to go into software as a service. Perhaps we were using Salesforce, for instance, or maybe we're using Exchange Online, part of the Office 365 stack. And then sometimes private cloud might be the way to go. Perhaps it's a highly regulated industry or something where security is really of the utmost concern. So when we start to look at cloud, all these challenges really start to build up. And really, it starts to become a challenge just to design what we're going to be able to do. And that's where we go, well, where do we start? Now, today's webinar, we're going to be just touching on three primary pillars, that of connectivity, security, and management. Now, there's many other areas, obviously, when it comes to a multi-cloud environment that are pertinent, that would have to be designed and architected when we come to designing an environment. We're just going to touch on these three low-hanging fruits at the moment of connectivity, security, and management. So that first one is connectivity. Now, connectivity really is the underlying backbone of how users get access to their data. And before we even start to look at how we arrange that connectivity, we end up having to look at where we're going to be putting that data, because it's a complex environment. There's dependencies around that environment. We need a simple network, a network that's scalable, that's able to extend out, not just on our private network, where perhaps it's all sitting at the moment, but out into those multi-cloud public environments. And we've got redundancy. We need to have multiple links to be able to get our data. We spoke a little bit before about security and the fact that we need to maintain a standard security posture across all these links. And then we've got performance. We need to be easy for users to access. And we need to ensure that workloads are in the right location. And when we think about workloads being in the right location, that all needs to be designed even before we start to roll out that network. Really, we need to do an assessment of what our workloads are before we can start to adopt that multi-cloud strategy. Why is that important? Well, as we mentioned before, not all clouds are equal. We might have one public cloud that's fantastic for running our VM so that they can expand and contract as needed. We might have another cloud that's great for running our web services. We might have software as a service platforms. We might have some of our applications that are legacy that might need to remain in private cloud. And really the only way to work out that is to do an assessment on a application by application or server by server load to see where it makes sense to put those different applications. Once we've done that workload assessment, once we've know where our data is going to be stored, that's when we can start to look at that connectivity layer. At Harbour IT, really we acknowledge that the WAN is the core of a multi-cloud environment. When we look at our architectural diagram here, we've got our private cloud there on the left. We've got our connections over there on the right to our public clouds, Azure, Office 365, our SaaS platforms, Google, AWS. But in the center of that, really it's the connectivity. Connectivity out to our private cloud, connectivity is out to our public clouds and our software as a service platform. And that's really the case with any well-designed multi-cloud environment. When we think about having that at the core, it makes management easy. It makes visibility of those links. It makes being able to control the metrics around those links, because those links out to our public cloud become part of our WAN. They become part of just another leg where we can see the data, we can see the pipe size, we can start to gain some metrics around those links. And when we start to look at the landscape of where WANs are these days, if we went back 5 years, we might have been having an MPLS network or an IP WAN network. We might have had perhaps VPNs connecting us over internet links. Fast forward that, people are talking about SD-WANs these days. But are either of these WANs the right solution for you? We might have some voice traffic, our voice phone system going out over the WAN. Is a SD-WAN solution the right solution for that sort of traffic? When we need to do quality of service end-to-end to make sure that that is the highest priority traffic on our network, to make sure that that customer phone call doesn't drop. Or if we got YouTube traffic, somebody sitting in their lunch break, doing some research, does that need to be high priority? Does that need to be routed over a corporate MPLS network where there's quality of service all the way? Or perhaps we've got a satellite office that's got 2 people working in the office. Do we really want to go to the effort of maintaining an internet edge firewall at that site for just 2 users? You see, what we find these days is hybrid WANs are what people are looking at. The ability really to pick and choose the best of both worlds, to be able to have an MPLS network where we can control quality of service, we can control the links, we can keep that link and that traffic completely private, and having those internet links where we can route over a low-cost connection or to our software as a service platforms like Teams that we're using today, straight onto the internet without having to hop that back through our corporate network. And then when we start to have a think about that links as well, you go out to most companies like Telstra and Optus, TPG these days, and you'll get a Telstra link or you'll get an Optus link. Where at Harbour, what we do is we are an aggregator. What an aggregator means is we're not affiliated with any one carrier, so we're carrier agnostic. So when we start to design our networks, then we can start to go, okay, what link makes sense for you? And in one location, it might be Telstra. In one location, it might be a Vocus link. And we can start to do things like path diversity for your link. So your fiber comes in on different pits in the street. We can do carrier diversity for your backup links so that you're not reliant on a single carrier. And that's some of the benefits really of going with an aggregator over going with one of the mainstream carriers, is to be able to provide that full redundancy of carrier, of pit, of link, routers, firewalls, all those things right from end to end on your network. And really that starts to come in to the overall design of your WAN and why your WAN really is that centerpiece of your multi-cloud connectivity. And it even starts to tie in with your security of your multi-WAN as well. We think of your edge firewalls on your WAN, whether it's at site, whether it's in your data center. Going back a few years ago, really firewalls were looking at that layer 2, layer 3, maybe layer 4 of that TCP/IP stack of the traffic. But nowadays we're going right up into the layer 7. What that means is we're not just looking at where the traffic's coming from, where the traffic's going to, what ports it's on, but we're starting to actually look at what the application is at the firewall level. That application is Facebook, for instance. What within Facebook is that application doing? Or that application is Salesforce. Where in that Salesforce application is that traffic going to? And really starting to get really granular at the connectivity issue of where the traffic's going to and what the actual traffic is. So that's one of those key pillars, is connectivity. Next, we've just started touching on security. We'll have a look at some of the low-hanging fruits in security. Again, with security, there's so many aspects, and we could run a full webinar just on security, but we're just going to touch on just a couple of points within security this afternoon. Security really is a challenge within multi-cloud environments. You've got user access, where users just want to have a single user to be able to access those multiple clouds. So identity management really becomes an issue. You've got administrative access, where users have to administer those multiple environments. How do you do that in a secure way? And how do you do all that from a single pane of glass? Well, that's why at the center, as we've discussed, is our connectivity, but at the center of security within our multi-cloud environment really is our identity management. You see, when we start looking at those multiple clouds, like we'd see on the diagram there, whether we're in Azure, whether we're in AWS, whether we're in, excuse me, software as a service platform like Microsoft Office 365, users don't want to have multiple user accounts they have to sign in with. Users want a single account. They want to remember one password. And even from an administrative point of view, when we start to control users' access, what those users are allowed access to, we want to do that from one pane of glass, not multiple panes of glass. And that's really when identity management becomes so important within our multi-cloud environment, to be able to synchronize that single user across those multiple environments, to allow that user to have that same password, that same username, to be able to access their day-to-day applications that they would normally use. And that even comes back to on-prem applications. Next part we'll look at is how that single user can then start to control that security with conditional access within your environment. You see, when we start to look at how a user works, then we really have to start to look at where the user works, what the user is working on, what they're accessing, and that conditional access comes into that. As an example, we might have a user that's working in the office, and they might access their email that's in software as a service, Exchange Online, for instance. And you might say, okay, well, we need a username and password. The user then leaves the office and they go to a cafe down the street and they're on public Wi-Fi. Well, that's when we start to look at that conditional access of, okay, we need an extra layer of security implemented just because we're on an unknown network. So we might, at that point, invoke multi-factor authentication. So we might ask that user for another form of authentication. Or perhaps with our conditional access, it might be based on an application. Perhaps for a sensitive application, perhaps Salesforce, we might always enforce the fact that they have to be on a company laptop. They have to be on the corporate network, and we invoke multi-factor authentication. So that's when, and this ties in with that identity management that we spoke about before, enforcing the different levels of security based on the conditions that the user is in at the time.
That's a quick question for you there. I mean, this obviously looks fairly important from our perspective. I mean, how critical is implementing this strategy? And I know you had a pretty good example you spoke to me about the other day, so maybe if you could just expand on that. Yeah,
sure. So really, we had an example, maybe it's the best way to answer it, of a client of ours that didn't have identity management working. They didn't have any of this conditional access. They didn't even have multi-factor authentication within their environment. And they were using Exchange Online. Now, one of their accounts was compromised within Exchange Online, and it happened to be the CEO of the organization. So his username and password obviously was guessed or discovered or hacked. And the user that got on there started to send internal emails. So there was no external emails, but started to send emails back to the account staff asking for bank accounts to be changed. And they obviously didn't have any internal policies to follow those sorts of things up with calls. And they ended up being defrauded to the sum of around about $25,000. Now that's not a huge amount of money for some companies, but still it's wasted money. It could have been a lot worse for this company. But when we start to look at some of these security initiatives, if they had multi-factor authentication enabled, that wouldn't happen. If they had conditional access, I mean, this user that came in from a different country. So one of the conditional access we can enable is, if the traffic is originating from outside of Australia, do X, Y, Z. If they had any one of those additional security measures enabled, then they wouldn't have been defrauded. And when we look at how much that could have cost that organization, really a lot of these security initiatives end up paying for themselves. So I heard a saying the other day, which is I really like, which is security is always excessive until it's not enough. And that's really with a lot of these things. Security needs to be in place, even if we think it's overkill, because when it's not overkill, that's when it saves us.
Thanks. That's a good example.
We'll have a look at the next part then, which starts to look at privileged access. So this is our administrators and what we do around securing administrators' access. So we're always going to need admins within the organization, and that admin could be an IT administrator, that admin could be a department manager. That department manager needs to create new users, or needs to change some role assignments for users within his team. That administrator could just be simply a help desk that creates users. Whatever the case may be, there's always going to be a need for people to have elevated permissions over and above what a normal user is. But do we want to have that user having administrative access all the time? Going back to that previous example, if an account is compromised and it's got administrative access, so much more damage can be done within your environment than if it was just a user account. And that's really where this privileged identity management comes to play. It's about really reducing the exposure, reducing the exact attack surface, and mitigating the risk. And the way it does that is by not giving that user administrative access all the time. It gives them access just in time. It gives them access when they need it. Now, the beauty of this is, say it was a department manager that needed the access, you can have it so that he needs approval to get that access. So he has to send a request through his manager saying, I need access for XYZ. You have justification at that point. You have it logged at that point so that you can go back through your logs to see why they needed access. You have a reviewer reviewing why he needs access. You've got full audit history of that elevated permission. And then with that conditional access tied in with this privileged identity management, we can start to do things like multi-factor authentication. So to be able to elevate his permissions, obviously he needs that second form of ID. And what all of these things do is it means that users can continue to do the day-to-day work, or administrators can continue to do that day-to-day work, but we're reducing our attack surface within the environment. We're reducing our risk within the environment, which is what security is about. Security is not about limiting our users. Security is not about stopping them from doing their work, but it's about adding that extra layer of security so that they can continue to do their work in a secure environment.
Nathan, we've just got a question from Will here, Will James. It says, how will implementing this impact users? Could you answer that?
Yeah, so that's really good. And really that comes down to what we're just speaking about, is it's the ability for users to do the day-to-day work. So users are always going to need administrative rights, in one form or another, across those various roles. And we don't want to stop users doing their work, but what we want to do is we want to ensure that when they're not doing their administrative tasks, that they've got the right level of rights for the task they're doing at the moment. And that's that just-in-time privileged access. So when they need it, they can get it elevated, and it's time-based as well. So if they need to do a task that takes 10 minutes, then the permissions are elevated for 10 minutes, and then it comes back down. So it's not about limiting users at all, but it's about empowering them when they need to be empowered, but maintaining a secure environment.
Okay, thanks, Nathan. Thanks for the question, Will.
And just to add, Nathan, as well, I mean, like something that comes across our desk quite often is, many organisations have attempted to implement, PIM or privileged identity management across their environment, and then realise that it's having such a negative impact on operational teams. So those operational teams then all of a sudden, lose the ability to effectively manage the platform, which causes a massive amount of disruption. So it's really key that if you're going to tackle something like, privileged identity management, that it's done correctly, because it can actually impact the business quite extensively.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. So it needs to be obviously designed and architected properly before it gets implemented. Yeah. Well, the next bit we're just going to talk briefly about is bringing security back down to our user layer. That's with this Microsoft Advanced Threat Analytics. Now, when you think about the end layer, so we're talking about laptops, workstations, those sorts of things, security or endpoint security on those systems traditionally used to be anti-malware, antivirus, and that were potentially signature-based things whereby they looked at the traffic, and if that traffic matched a known database, then it was malicious, and we can tie it up and say, hey, we're going to stop that, it's malicious. But a few years ago, things started to move beyond that, and endpoint security started changing. Endpoint security started invoking AI. So it started to look at what that application was doing within that within that user's laptop or workstation, to be able to look at if it was malicious or not just using a signature base. And then it's gone one step further again with this advanced threat analytics. And what this does is it starts to look at users' behavior. So it starts to catalog, okay, user XYZ gets into the office at such and such a time, he checks his emails, he goes onto this application, he accesses these file shares. And over a period of time, the AI behind this can start to build out a good picture of what a user does in a typical day. Now, if that user all of a sudden starts pulling loads of files down from a file server, or if that user starts going to multiple websites that they don't normally do, then it starts to trigger alarms because it's outside of the normal day-to-day activity that that user normally does. Now, why is it important to have something like this running? Well, from an IT perspective, traditionally how things are done is we create rules and we create policies. Now, those policies and those rules get out of date, and somebody's got to keep updating those rules. Somebody's got to update those policies to say a user should be doing X, Y, Z, or locking them so they can't do, 1, 2, 3. But when AI starts to get involved, then it starts to use algorithms that look at what the user would typically do. And it means that it's a continuous learning. So if that user starts to change their activities, maybe they get a new application, then it can learn that without triggering alerts. So we end up getting a faster response. We end up getting less false positives because it's looking at that overall user behavior. And it can compare that user to organizational behavior as well. So we start to get a picture of that user compared with all the other users. And so from an IT perspective and from a security analytics perspective within our organization, we end up having less policies that we create, but a more secure environment. Again, it's all about reducing risk within our environment, and that risk of the end user device, which is a lot of the time where attacks come into our organization, and reducing the risk within that environment. And one of the things that, obviously across all of these platforms is the management. So we're going to have a look at, how that third pillar there of management, how workloads within our multi-cloud environment, how costs within our multi-cloud environment can be managed. We're going to have a demonstration of that in a minute too. So I'll hand over to Ricky. Thanks, Ricky.
Thanks, Nathan. Look, I think, one of the first slides that you actually started to talk to was pretty relatable for probably a lot of people on the call, and definitely for myself and a lot of the customers of ours that we speak to quite regularly, right? Like the reality is that a lot of organizations are already in some form of a hybrid or a multi-cloud landscape, whether that be that they've got workloads that sit, on-prem, they've got some workloads that might sit on our Harbour IT private cloud metro infrastructure. They might have some workloads in AWS or Azure as well. So, what sort of stems from that is this, this cycle of conversations around, how do we get a good strategy around how we manage all of these, distributed workloads that sit in different geographical locations, and they could be all within a single country, or they could be, spread across globally. So one of those key challenges that comes up quite often is, how do we sort of get a single point of reference that we can log into, and we can get good centralized visibility of those workloads, regardless of where they are, right? So that becomes really key to, a successful multi-cloud management strategy. The other piece that also ties very closely in with the management aspect is the next level down of the visibility and the insights of those workloads. So how can we see what those workloads are doing? How do we gain performance metrics of the performance of those workloads? When are they performing well? When are they not performing so well? And how can I wrap some automated alerting triggers or smarts around specific events, logs, or metric statistics to give us the true visibility and insights in real time, whether it be via dashboards or via alerts of those workloads? So that becomes, really key as well to how we manage and how operational infrastructure teams and cloud infrastructure teams manage workloads across various locations. The other point that you spoke on as well is around the cost visibility. I know there's a lot of CFOs and CIOs out there that we talk to that really focus a lot on cost, and rightfully so, right? Because cloud spend can be really good one month, and then the next month it could not look so good. So it's all about, you've got workloads that sit in different distributed locations. All the cost analytics and reporting is decentralized. How do we sort of bring that in so we can get a true holistic view of what those workloads look like from a dollar and cents perspective? So that becomes quite key in that conversation as well. The other thing that we're starting to work a little bit more closely aligned with is probably the next layer down in that operational function. So these are the smarts behind keeping the platforms up, stable, standardizing deployments, rolling out application sets, deploying new servers, changing resources, altering services, all that sort of stuff. So coming up with a method where you can centralize your orchestration platform and have a single, centralized location for all of your automation workflows to run through, whether it be, interlinking with Terraform, Ansible, Chef, Puppet, you name it, any sort of, infrastructure as code automation tool set that will help provision and manage workloads. That becomes quite important. How can we connect all those disconnected systems into a centralized automation platform? So we can, single click, the dream is single click deployment, single click standardization. How do we deploy a single click dev test environment that spins up multiple servers for a specific application team so they can actually, test on a monthly or a weekly basis and then decommission that workload. So I'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide as well. And the final point, which, is very critical in a multi-cloud management tool, is the integration capability. So these days, everything's about shifting data left, right, and center, and really making sure that all of our systems can connect and communicate and pass data and information between all of the different tool sets. Now that might be, integrating a cloud management tool with a finance system, a CMDB system, an RMM, a monitoring tool. It doesn't really matter as long as both systems have capability to integrate. And that becomes, I guess, one of the final points in what's critical to making multi-cloud management a success within an organization. So that brings us sort of to the next question, which is, what's our approach to cloud management? What do we do, and how do we help our customers navigate through that multi-cloud management, challenge that everyone faces? So using the diagram that you had up before, Nathan, is probably a good place to start, right? So it's a visual representation of what a typical multi-cloud or a hybrid cloud landscape could look like, where we've got the Harbour IT Cloud Metro private platform sitting out on the left. We've got the interconnecting pieces in the middle that represent Harbour IT Cloud Connect and the Harbour Net platform, and then all the various express routes or WAN peering services that then connect into a plethora of different public cloud environments, whether it be Azure, AWS, GCP, either or all of them, right? And then what we sort of look at is, we've got one of our primary products that we use and our tools and our offerings that we use in this space is our cloud management platform, our CMP. And our cloud management platform really is the guts of how we solve some of these challenges for our customers. And the CMP is responsible for providing a couple of key services, and we did speak about them a little bit earlier. One is true self-service capability across the multi-cloud landscape. So that is, operational teams being able to see workloads regardless of where they sit. It could be on-prem, it could be in our private cloud, it could be on AWS, on Azure, and really giving them self-service capability to provision, to manage, to adjust resources, any type of administration function you'd expect to see. The second point is all around that cost control that we spoke about. And the CMP really is responsible for, at this point, for bringing together all of the different cost information points from various cloud vendors. Again, whether it be an on-prem environment that you can interconnect and integrate with an internal finance system, it could be our platform, it could be AWS or Azure, but bringing them all together into a centralized location so you can actually see a holistic view of your spend and your cost analytics across the multi-cloud landscape. And then the third piece is the automation. Like, how do we make it easier for our infrastructure and operation teams to manage and provision workloads when required? We know that the businesses these days, when there's an idea, they want to take it to market really quickly. They want that time to happen in days, if not hours. There's, gone are the days where businesses are accepting that technology will make them wait weeks or months before an application set or a new workload is provisioned or stood up. So, centralizing all that automation and orchestration process into a centralized CMP becomes super critical. And if we take an example here of what that looks like across a typical customer landscape, and we'll say, customer A, they're running some workloads that sit in the HubRT Cloud Metro private cloud platform, so a couple of VMs. They might have a couple of virtual machines that run in the Azure public cloud space and a couple of virtual machines that run in AWS. And what it looks like in practice is all three of these data center or cloud locations become interconnected with the CMP from a management perspective. And all that data and information and the management aspect of those workloads can be funneled into the cloud management platform. So that sort of solves the management aspect of how we do things and how we help our customers do things, and some of the products we have and services that we offer to assist and aid through that multi-cloud management journey. The second key area is the visibility, is the insights, the advanced monitoring of these workloads. And that really comes into play with our Cloud Insights platform. So we essentially go in and wrap around all of our data feeds from these various locations. We pull them down into our Cloud Insights platform, and that gives us true observability across that complete landscape. So we can see, performance metrics. We can see when a service or a system is not operating as required. We get access to real-time dashboards, all of which is completely customizable. You can sort of, manipulate those into whatever aspect you want to sort of see them, whether it's infrastructure component monitoring and observability, or whether it's more advanced application level insights across those workloads. So combined, those two products for us and those offerings that we provide to our customers is something that becomes really crucial in helping and assisting through that multi-cloud management journey. So on that note, rather than talking to slides, I thought what might be a good idea is actually show you guys in the flesh what some of these tools look like. So what I'll do here now is I'll flick over to share my screen. And I'm assuming about now you can see my screen, Nathan. Maybe a thumbs up to confirm. Perfect, and I'll just minimize you because we've got more important things to look at the moment. So if I browse into the CMP, I can see straight away, I've hit the URL and I'm getting prompted to log in. So I've got a demo user here that I'll log in with. I type my password in correctly. And then straight away you can see I'm getting prompted to authenticate via my multi-factor authentication app. Something you spoke about before, Nathan, which is the conditional access triggers to allow me to authenticate to this application. So I've just pressed that submit button on my phone, and straight away I'm presented with the HubRT Cloud Metro portal, which is our CMP system. And we can see that we're at the dashboard view right about now, right? So what we can see is, straight away a pretty rich graphical interface of our multi-cloud landscape. And without running into too much detail, we can see straight away the application list. I can see that I've got a couple of virtual machines running in AWS. I've got 5 virtual machines running in my Azure Dev Test environment, 3 of which are powered on, 2 of which are currently powered off. I can see a couple of resource groups that I've got for things like my log analytics workspace, my Arc environment, and also some data feeds that I'm pulling across from AWS into certain services into Azure. I've then got my workloads that run on my Cloud Metro platform, so my private infrastructure as a service platform that we host for many of our customers. And I can see that I've got 5 virtual machines and a virtual firewall that's running in the form of a NVA appliance. From here, I can do management activities that you would expect. I can click into the server itself. I can see information like the amount of resources it's provisioned, whether it's running or not running. I can perform power functions, whether it be reset, shut down, power off, power on. I can also console directly to the servers. So by launching that, I'm presented with the console of that specific server. So I can see that I've got full administration access simply via the CMP, and that's across all of the workloads, not just the Cloud Metro workloads. I can do the same and use my RDP connections to the AWS and Azure instances as well. From here, I can also do things like decommission the server if I decide that I want to blow it away and it's no longer required. And we wrap an approval process around that as well, just to make sure that there's a couple of checks and balances before someone actually can press the delete button. I can change the resources. I can increase CPU, RAM. I can adjust all that. I can add disk. I can remove disk. I can pick specific tiers of disk performance that I want, which will then get submitted, and all the automation workflows on the back end will then, provision those workloads and expand those resources as we need them to. I can also see that in this dashboard view, which is quite rich in information. I can see a month-to-date cost trend. I can see that last month I spent roughly, $1,100 on this demo environment across all of the cloud services. And for October, I'm trending, roughly the same. I've probably got a few more virtual machines that are not running for so much of this month, but I can really start to see at a quick glance some good cost insights across all of those cloud environments.
Okay, that's not a good question, Will. He's mentioned in the chat window, does the CMP have the ability to fail over between clouds and fail back? I mean, maybe you want to talk around the redundancy and failover and where you can work within that area?
Yeah, definitely. So just at a very high level, so the CMP platform that we run and operate that then interconnects to all of the different cloud environments, that sits on our Cloud Metro platform, which is fully redundant across 2 data center regions. It's configured in an active-active scenario. It's got sync replication. It's got redundant application clustering on all aspects of the application layer. So from a resilience perspective, when we provide this service to customers in an as a service model, it comes with our standard SLA and uptime availability thresholds. It's obviously all tied back to an agreement, and you typically expect to see the same workload uptime and SLA capabilities as you would if you were a customer that was running your own corporate workloads on our private cloud platform as well. So it's got from the ground up, it's secure by design, and it's designed with resiliency in mind, because we really see this as a critical tool for our customers to use to manage their operations as well.
Yeah, thanks. I think it's worth pointing out too, we have a significant number of financial services customers on there too, and of course uptime is critical in some areas of financial services during business hours too, and the security level. So good question. Thank you very much for that, Will, and thanks, Vicky.
Correct. No, awesome. And yeah, just very quickly, we've also got some information here that tells us about performance. I can see straight away that the CMP is looking at the insights of these virtual machines and telling me that I've got a couple of VMs here that are sort of complaining that they don't have enough CPU usage, and the peaks are sitting at around 93-95%. So I can action that. I can do something about that. And more importantly, I get these proactive recommendations, and these are very much aligned to both performance but also cost savings. So I can see in this demo environment, the CMP is basically telling me that, hey, you can save some money if you change some of the instance types that sit across AWS and Azure, and also if you reduce some of the resource allocation on some of the private cloud workloads that I've got spun up in this instance as well. The other component that I sort of wanted to run through very quickly was the cost dashboard. So we get a vast amount of detailed information here around, what these cost dashboards are doing, what types of workloads are consuming daily costs. Becomes very important for operational teams that are focused on reducing cost or staying in control of costs. And then I spoke before about the centralized automation component, and this is where the magic sort of happens in that space, and we present this to customers via the service catalog. So in here I've got some examples of some specific functions that you can do. You can perform server deployments in Azure, you can do server deployments on Cloud Metro, you can even spin up full application sets that by a single click button and a next OK, it will actually go and spin up 5 application servers, a couple of back-end database servers. It can import data, it can throw data up to another application landing zone. It can really be tailored and customized to the requirements of the customer to provide that centralized orchestration and automation process end to end. And that's across all clouds. So it's super critical when it comes to centralizing that function. And then finally, this is the management aspect of the toolset. And then we've got the insights of the tool. So straight away, when I click on that Cloud Insights link, I'm presented with our observability platform, which monitors and provides us real-time insight across our workloads. So I can see here that I'm taken to my multi-cloud landing page, and I can gain access to a dashboard that shows me the overall monitoring aspects of the whole multi-cloud landscape, or I can see individual workloads. I can drill into AWS, Azure, or the Cloud Metro. For this purpose, I'll open up the overall dashboard, which once it loads will actually show us some really good, quick information. And these dashboards I created in about 10 minutes when I set them up. So they're very easy to create, super customizable, and can be tailored to monitor anything from an application to a server metric or some sort of event trigger that occurs on the workload. And I can see here at a quick snapshot, I've got 12 virtual machines running, 2 of which are down, which are the 2 Azure ones that I had in a demo environment that are not operating at the moment. I can see the breakup of the OS type, the additions. I can see the usage charts for CPU, memory. I can drill into those components as well and look at, what do my peaks look like? What are my heavy hitters? Where do I need to maybe expand some resources? And the beauty of this advanced Cloud Insights platform that we offer, again, as a service to our customers, is it's all customizable, but we also can wrap all of the alert and event triggers around this platform as well. So when you want to know about, a disk filling up, a server being offline, network performance not looking like it should, wrapping all those automated alert triggers around this component can really then, allow our operational teams to provide a much better service back to the business.
Vicky, just conscious of time. I mean, obviously we can go into a lot more detail if anybody requests a detailed, I guess, review and workshop on this. So I think we should probably move on to the Q&A now, if that's okay.
And yeah, look, and that was it. That was my last thing that I just wanted to show everyone. So yeah, finished with the demo and happy to step through the Q&A process now.
Right, thanks, mate. Nathan, do you want to pull the slide deck up, please? Right, okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, just before we pass to the Q&A, we've got Adrian, Ricky and Nathan to be on our expert panel, of course. Did want to talk to you about a particular cloud offer that Canon Business Services are doing. Just prior to that, though, I did want to go back to a slide that Nathan was talking around, the cloud workload assessment. If you go on this journey, depending on whether you're just starting or whether you're halfway through, we offer our customers through our professional services team and our solutions architecture team a cloud workload assessment. Can really help you, understand what workloads need to go where. Is it private cloud, is it public cloud, and what needs to be done. And then following that, there's obviously the transformation. And at the moment, we've got an offer of up to $50,000 off your initial cloud migration costs from professional services cost. If you want to learn more, just click on the QR code there, please, and that'll take you through some details. Or if you've got an existing account manager, please reach out to them, or we'll touch base after this anyway with a follow-up email thanking you for your attendance, and you can make an inquiry from that way too. So on to now, we've got 5 or 6 minutes left. Onto the Q&A session. I'd like to know if there's a link in there in the chat window too. if there's any actually questions and open it up to the wider audience. You will be all unmuted from now on. If you would like to put any questions into the chat window, I'm happy to moderate on those too. Any questions from anybody?
Must have done a good job, Nathan and Ricky. You answered everyone's questions.
I think you did, guys. Yeah, look, it was really interesting. I think it's good. It's a very relevant topic, right? It's one of those things that people are still struggling with, even though we've been on the cloud journey for quite some time. Security is always key. Management, I love that piece that you do, Vicky. Right. I think that's the, that's the key. Multi-cloud management and cost control. Nobody wants those sticker shocks.
Yeah, that's right. That's very important.
And a lot of these things too, guys, come down to design, right? So whether we're implementing a security platform, whether it's the connectivity layer, whether it's the management, is making sure that it's architected correctly, because any project, and this is across Harbour when we do projects, and you guys, within your own business, if you get the design right, if you get the detailed design right, then the project flows smoothly. It's when you don't get the details. And somebody mentioned the example before around that privileged access management, PIM, or privileged identity management, sorry, where the design wasn't done right, and then there's all sorts of troubles. And that's really a key element, across Harbour when we're managing projects, is making sure that that design is done correctly to start with. Yeah,
look, I think you look at the reasons why people are going to cloud, right? I had a great conversation with a client that we're working on, Adrian, together, and the strategy they need is the business is growing. They don't want to be doing BAU. They want to do high value tasks for their customers. They don't want to be managing internal kit. There's going to be, financial risk there when they've ordered more than storage than they need. They see a risk in running their own data centers, and why do they need to spin up 2 full versions of DR? So all these kind of aspects, and what workloads happen, and can I lift and shift? All the questions a lot of people are going through. And I think, with the experience we've got, whether it's private, public, or or hybrid cloud environment, and that workload assessment is pretty valuable. So I'll open it up one more time if there's any questions from anybody. If not, we might finish.
Looks like we've got a question in the chat from Alan, Steve, yep. which probably is directed at either Nathan or Adrian or both. For clients that are just starting this journey or thinking about this, where do you suggest they start?
Yeah, I'm happy to field that one. Really, I think I've spoken about it, and Steve's spoken about it too. If it's right at the beginning, then that cloud assessment is really vital. And the reason behind that is when you start to look at the overall architecture of a multi-cloud environment, we do the connectivity layer and the security. You can't start to design that if you don't know where your data is going to go. And until you do that assessment on the workloads that you're going to be running within those clouds, then you can't start to design those aspects. So really the landing point, or the starting point, sorry, is that multi-cloud assessment, or that cloud assessment, or cloud readiness assessment, we call it. And what that does is we go through each and every workload that you've got within your environment. So it might be at an application level, or at a server level, or at a services level, and look at where that makes sense to go, whether that makes sense to go to a software as a service platform and migrate over there, whether it makes sense to go into private cloud, public cloud. Once you've got all that mapped out and you know where your data is going to be, then all the other architectural pieces, the connectivity layer and the security across them, starts to piece into that. So really that cloud readiness assessment is where you'd start.
That kind of, just to add to that as well, to tie into, what we're helping customers understand as part of that workload assessment is, is workload A, can we rehost, do we have to rehost that as an infrastructure as a service without change? Are we going to refactor it? Are we going to move to like a PaaS platform? Or are we literally going to re-architect? So we're going to rebuild it from scratch and go Kubernetes, containers, really change the way the apps and services are delivered. So without doing that workload assessment and going through which of the phases are you going to take in your next 12, 36 month journey or strategy, application strategy, then it's very difficult to look at all the rest of the areas.
Yeah, great questions, guys. Look, I think we've got 1 minute left. That's great. Thank you again, Ricky, Adrian, and Nathan, for your time. Very interesting today. I hope everyone else found it interesting. And with that, we might say good afternoon, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day. And thank you for turning up.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.